today. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a real quick intro.
Sure.
Welcome everyone, or welcome Bruce for joining us. This is Bruce Wehner. He's from E3 Wealth and E3 Consultants Group, and I'm sure he'll tell you a little bit more about that. But as those of you who are logged in listening to us speaking, and AJ commented in the chat, yes, he was teaching me some things, and he's going to teach a lot of you some things today about wealth and about how it applies to your business idea as you move forward this school year and later on in life as well. So thanks again for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, everybody. Just give you, I don't know if this is important to you. I actually was a teacher for 17 years before I got into the wealth and consulting side of this. And it actually drives me crazy that I can't be there to interact with you guys in person. We're going to do our best to try to get a normal situation here as much as possible. And I will stop every once in a while and allow you to ask some questions. And I tell people all the time, I don't have all the answers, but I've sat in on over 4,000 client meetings and resource meetings, vendor meetings, conferences. And I don't know where, or if I don't know what the answer is, I know where to find the answer. There was a really important, I'm showing my age here, but there's a really important message that was in the 70s that the Wall Street Journal, and many of you probably at least have read the Wall Street Journal at once, and their advertising in the 70s was, knowledge is not power, but knowing where to find it is. And that was the idea, is that read the Wall Street Journal and you'll get the knowledge that you need to be successful in life. And a lot of times people don't even know the answer because they don't even know what question there is out there. So what I thought I would do today is, yes, I am an investment advisor. Yes, I help people build their net worth. But at E3 Consultants Group here in St. Louis, the headquarters is in St. Louis, and we have offices in Scottsdale and Austin and Nashville, Seattle, Miami, so on and so forth. But we also help businesses design their business and consult with them so that they can maximize the net worth of the business. Now, because we only have about 60 minutes, you're going to get an overview here, and I apologize for that because this is the kind of stuff that you should never stop learning about. But what I'm going to start with, guys, is we're going to start with kind of like what I call the business 101 and what you need to think about, and I'll be sharing my screen here in a second. But the main thing is I want you to realize that mindset, how you determine how you think about a problem, will get you through most of the things as an entrepreneur. So it is the ability for you to remain positive and creative that will allow you to be successful even in the darkest times. And as we have right now, many businesses going under during COVID, and we're going to talk about reasons why they have gone under and why some of them have been successful. But most of the time, it's because of two reasons. One, their creativity, and two, they were well capitalized. And what that means is they had resources, whether it's money or the ability to get loans so that they could stay afloat during these difficult times. And we're going to talk about that in just a second, but most businesses fail. Can I just see raise your hand if you believe most businesses fail within 5 years? Okay, that is what people think all the time, and the fact of the matter is, it's true. Now, let me ask you this question. Do you believe if you start a business, it would fail within 5 years? Well, John, we have to change your attitude. Okay, Sam, we change your attitude. Because if you believe that, then there's two things. You don't know how to set it up properly, or you have the wrong goods and service to offer out there to the universe. Because that's what's so great about the free market, is that you will get paid and be successful if you have something that a majority of the people on this planet want. If they don't want it, then you will fail. And that's what the free market is all about. So I'm going to share my screen now. We're going to go through the different steps that you need to start thinking about when you're starting a business. And I just call this Starting a Business 101. I'm not going to read every one of these out to you guys. I'm just going to use it as a starting point for conversations. I'm sorry, I'm trying to set up my computer to make sure I can see you guys while I'm talking in case anybody has a question. Okay, so if one of your main goals in life is to start your own business, you really need to think about this as building your own business as that's been on your bucket list. And if you guys don't know that phrase, it's usually for older people. It's like, what do I want to do before I kick the bucket, you know, or die? It has to be something that you really, really want to be passionate about. Because if you're not passionate about it and you don't believe in it, what you're actually going to do is what I refer to as you're going to build or buy yourself a job. And I see this over and over again. Somebody, they say, hey, I think the world needs this widget or this service, but I really am not that excited about it. So they start to build this widget or they start to build this service, and it's not that successful, but they have employees, and they actually pay their employees a salary that's market driven. And then they only take what's left at the end. And most of the time, there's nothing or very little for them left at the end. And so then they get discouraged. And that's why, as you see here, 30% of the businesses fail within the first year, and half of all close up within 5 years. Only a third of the businesses will make it to their 10th anniversary. And I believe it's mainly because of the lack of passion. You haven't started with something that you really want to see through. You have to be able to say, when things are going poorly, I'm still going to make it through this. All right, now let's go to the next thing. I think this is pretty obvious. Most of the things, guys, when you're looking at this, is look at the red. That's exactly what I wanted to emphasize today in our time together. The leading cause is lack of profits. That seems to make sense for a lot of people, but I don't know if you know the difference between revenue and profit. And funding, meaning underestimating how much you need to actually fund your business. Working capital. Does anybody know what the term working capital means? Anybody want to? Let's see, I can't see everybody. So Justin, if you could help me. If anybody wants to comment on that, working capital, give you a few seconds. So working capital in a business is after you have all your startup costs. And what are some of the startup costs? Well, where you're going to house your business, your employees, all the rules and regulations, your office supplies, your equipment supplies, whether you need transportation, so on and so forth. After that, then, let's say you have $500,000 to start this, and if you spend all $500,000 thinking, well, when I open up the doors the very first day, or I put this out on the internet the very first day, I'm going to start getting revenue right away to cover my expenses. And if you don't, and you don't have working capital, it puts a stress throughout the entire business. You have to then go lend yourself money or get more investors, and you spend more time on that than you actually do building your business. So working capital is really excess money that you have above all your startup cost. So if you determine, we're going to talk about this in a second, but if you determine your startup cost for a particular business is $100,000, we usually recommend that you have about 20% additional working capital, or $20,000 above that startup cost. If it's a $500,000 business, then we would say you need to have another $100,000 of working capital for things that come up. So remember, profits and low starting funding or low working capital are factors why most businesses don't succeed. Here's a really important one. Oh, you got a question? Is that Disha? I can't hear you. Can you hear him, Justin?
Yeah, if somebody has a question, just feel free to unmute and just ask it. Or if you have a question, obviously type it in the chat. Yeah.
Okay. I can't see the chat box the way I'm set up, so.
I'll if it comes up, I'll ask it to you.
Yeah, you're going to have to help me out.
You got it.
Okay. I think this is the most important thing is you have to evaluate yourself. And when you evaluate yourself, you have to understand what you can bring to the table. I want you to write this person's name down, please. His name is Dan Sullivan, Sullivan, and he has run a company for entrepreneurs coaching since the late 70s called Strategic Coach. He's got all kinds of complimentary resources that you can Google and find, and he has a great podcast also. But Dan says that when you're launching a business or career or a new service or good, you need to consider what skills that you bring as the owner to it, and then you have to surround yourself with the proper people that actually help you run the business without having what I would say is a lot of people say, well, I'm just going to make my weaknesses better. So I have a weakness. I'm not very organized, you might say, but I can really talk to people and sell. But I'm not really organized, but I'm just going to work on getting more organized. And he says all you're going to do is move that bar a little bit, and you're not going to get that much more organized, but you're going to spend all this extra time trying to get better at that. And he says the better way to do it, and I agree with this 100%, is to find somebody that is their passion to stay organized. You guys all know that from dealing with your own classmates probably. Some are very, very organized. Some of them are really outgoing. Some of them are creative. So you don't want to get all creative people building a business, that same business. You don't want to just get all organized people that are introverts doing that particular business. You want to have a balance throughout this. And then finally, at the bottom line of this is, why do you want to start your own business? Does anybody want to comment on that? Why you want to do this?
So I don't have to work for anyone.
Okay, don't have to work for anyone. Anybody else?
I love like photography and like videography.
Okay. Those are two I would consider pretty good. Anybody else? So
I mean, I want to work a career where I feel like I'm actually solving a problem in the world.
those are really, really good. I'm so glad that somebody or nobody said, I want to make a lot of money. Now, you can make a lot of money, but if you go into that situation, in my opinion, if you go into that situation because you're looking at profits first and how much money you can make instead of how you can solve a problem or how you can have fun offering this, you're going to be miserable. And frankly, your clients are going to feel that pressure of you being miserable and that stress that you're trying to offer, or excuse me, that product or goods and services. They're going to feel that stress when you're trying to offer it to them. And this is a little bit deep for a lot of people, but I was actually a biology teacher, and I used to talk about how we are patterned from right at birth to be able to recognize facial expressions and body language and tone of voice before we even understand verbal communication. And that carries us through our entire life. So whenever you're trying to sell somebody on your goods and service, if you're not 100% committed to that, people know whether you're trying to just sell them a good, something that they don't really need, or it's really not that good. You really don't believe in it. And that is biological, in my opinion. So that's why when you start your business, you better want and do something that's really about your why you're doing it. Not because, oh, I think this is a good way of making money, even though I don't like to build car parts. I think it's silly. It goes against my my beliefs, because I think we ought to have, I believe we ought to have electric cars, or whatever your beliefs are. You really need to have that, because I believe most people know when you're just trying to fool them on what you really do. All right, so that's the why. I'm so glad you guys said what I would consider wise, and not, you just want to make a lot of money, because the money is the result of your why. Here's one. I think you guys are probably doing this in your class, or at least you guys could do that, is you can start brainstorming business ideas. And this is where most of the good businesses actually come about, is you start saying, hey guys, I see this problem out in the world. What can I do to actually solve that problem? Do you think this would work? And then you talk to somebody else and get their feedback. Now, they may be negative about the feedback. I'm going to give you an example of how I was involved with this. I want you to think back. Most of you guys aren't old enough to know this, but think back 10 years ago. I would be at a St. Louis Cardinal baseball game, and people were on their cell phones. Smartphones were just coming out at that time, and people were on their cell phones. And yet, when you're in a big group back then, you could get no cell service, because you were overloading the cell systems. Not only just the data systems, but the cell phone system to make calls, just 10 years ago. So one of my buddies says to me, hey, why don't we actually sell portable Wi-Fi systems that big events could actually buy, like additional towers that would be portable, that would go to these big events. And I said to him very candidly, I said, it's a great idea, but what's going to end up happening is the technology is going to catch up. The AT&Ts, the Verizons of the world are going to catch up. And after you spend all the hundreds of millions of dollars in this research and development, you might be able to sell this for 2 or 3 years, and you're not going to recoup all of your startup capital. And I'm not saying I had a crystal ball, but now you can go to a Cardinal game or any other game or a big concert, and you can make phone calls. You can stream video of the concert. You can do all these things on your basic plan. And that's because venues decided we need to demand this. So this is where brainstorming, getting somebody else's opinion that is not tainted by your passion to bring this goods or service to the marketplace. All right, anybody else have an example of that? All right, you guys are too modest. You don't want to talk very much. I get it. Or you're tired because it's late in the day. So here's the next part when you're doing your starting the business 101. You should conduct market research. Now, there are companies that will do this, but you can also do it with yourself with social media even nowadays, very cheaply. You could ask your friends and family to put out on social media, whether it is Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat, whatever you guys use, and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you guys think? And so you can do it very, very cheaply for market research. Now, if it's a bigger thing where you're going to get a lot more capital, you may want to actually take a firm and actually have them do some very serious market research. But if you're starting out your first business, you may say, I'm just going to do some qualitative analysis instead of quantitative analysis on this. If you don't know the difference between those two, quantitative analysis is basically, it is looking at the numbers very closely. Qualitative analysis is getting an overall feeling of how the market would react to your goods or product. So it's just like I said, you just put it out on social media. Hey, how many people would have a bicycle that did this? Would you think that is a good idea? And you just listen to people's reactions. If it's quantitative analysis, they would actually do a survey of independent people and then put together the actual numbers that say this bicycle for anybody in the age groups of 20 to 30 with this amount of income would actually buy one out of 100. One out of 100 people would actually buy one in this market area or this zip code or in this state. So it would be very, very specific numbers. That's the difference between quantitative, number-driven, and qualitative, just putting out an opinion of would you do this. The next part is, and you probably have talked about this again, and I want you to focus on about writing a business plan. Now, unfortunately, in my opinion, this is not as important as some people make it out to be. And so I want everybody to understand that this does not have to be extensive. It just but it needs to be fluid enough to pivot. So unfortunately, you do need one if you're going to be soliciting for funds from friends, families, investors, so on and so forth, or getting a loan from a bank. They're going to require a business plan. How many people know what liar's poker is? Can I see hands? Ever hear about liar's poker? So liar's poker is basically you're trying to convince somebody you have a better hand than they have. I consider business plans to be liar's poker because you can put they're going to ask you like projected numbers of revenue the first year. Well, you can do some market research, but it's still projected numbers. Then they're going to ask for expenses. What projected? You really don't know what they are, but anybody that's going to look at a business plan is going to want to look at some number before they invest in it. Once again, it doesn't need to be extensive. You can just say, I believe my revenue of the first month is going to be this, the second month's going to be this, the third month's going to be this. And you can go from there. And then you say, my expenses are going to be this, 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 and this. It does need to be fluid. So once you get into this development of this business, you're going to find the good and bad things along the way so you can change your business plan. And you're going to say, oh, through market research, my revenue is not going to do this. In order to be profitable, I'm going to have to cut something in the form of expenses. Okay, any comments on that?
Bruce, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Just, I think looking at the finance component of it, and yeah, a lot of a business plan is essentially projections.
Right.
What advice would you give to these students as they're kind of putting together a real simple business plan, lean canvas, as far as like pitching this to investors? Is it more important for like the length of the projections, like 6 months, 1 year, whatever? Or do you think people look more for overall profitability, thoroughness, realism? Like what are some components you think are best for them to focus on?
Yeah, I don't think you want to, I don't think anybody really looks at it in a long-term situation. They're going to look at that 1 to 3 year situation, unless you have a really legitimate reason why this is going to coast along, and then what we call hockey stick up. The graph looks like a hockey stick, and there are reasons there are some businesses that actually have that hockey stick capability, and they usually are because they're high capital startup businesses. So it takes a lot of capital to get them going. So there's a lot of expenditures at the very beginning, but all the capital is on a longer depreciation schedule. It's not going to wear out, so on and so forth. So once you get all that initial expense done, then they can really take off. But most of them we're looking for an investor's looking for 1 to 3 years. And I wouldn't, Justin, like I said, it's not easy to know exactly what's going to happen, but I would be able to justify how you got your numbers to an investor. So an example would be, let's say you're starting up and you're going to be selling new cell phones, for example. And you say, okay, the first year I'm going to do $1 million in sales by doing a little bit, about $80,300 a month in these sales. And the investor says, oh, that's pretty ambitious. How many cell phones do you have to sell to do that? And I've seen this before, that people just put numbers down and they don't look at how many they're selling. So then you have to back that out and say, well, am I selling them at $100? Well, does that seem reasonable? Now you say, how many cell phones do I actually have to sell at $100? The next thing you say is that many reasonable for that month time period. Then you break it down to, okay, that's how many is in a week, that's how many is in a day. And I also often recommend to say, how many are you selling per hour? Because that way you can decide your hours of business, and you can do some more market research on this too. But do I need to be open for 10 hours to hit my revenue goals of selling so many per hour? Or can I do the same thing by staying open for 8 hours? Now that's important, guys, because it's not just about the revenue, it's about expenses. So the longer you're open, the more expenses you have in the form of liability insurance, and the biggest one is employees, how much you're going to be paying employees if it's an employee-driven business. If it's not an employee-driven business, then you'd have to look at other things. But yeah, that's a great question, Justin, but I would break it down. The number one is make sure you're aware of how you got your numbers. Even if you can't justify it, I mean, if you don't have any market research, that you've actually had a system that you can say to the investor, well, I'm looking at selling, 100 phones a month. That will be 25 a week. That will be 6 a day, whatever your metrics are. So you can actually, those just roll off the tongue so that they're confident that you've done enough research and at least looking at the numbers, not just pulling them out of the air and sky and saying, oh, I hope I hit this. This is something I think is very, very important. Make your business official. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. Because if you're successful in business, one of your biggest, if not the biggest expense will be taxes. And so businesses that have large revenues coming in are more likely to get audited than other people that are just W-2 employees. There's a variety of reasons for that. One is that there's a lot of deductions you can have as a business. Well, the IRS, I'm not afraid of the IRS as long as you keep everything actually documented of why you did it, and you follow the IRS tax codes, which are just a series of incentives, then you will pass with flying colors. What the IRS is trying to figure out is this a legitimate business? Are you doing the things according to the tax code, or are you just doing this fly-by-night? Are you just trying to take a hobby and actually get some business deductions from this? So determining the structure of your business, and a good tax attorney or CPA can help you with. One of the things I think is the most confusing things when we start talking about this is the structure of your business is different than how you're going to be taxed. And I'll just give you an example. You see here it says LLC, corporation, or partnership. You could have a limited liability corporation that is not taxed as a C corporation or as a S corporation. They use the same name, but you can have a limited liability corporation that's taxed as a partnership. Or you can have a limited liability corporation that's taxed as a sole proprietorship. I wouldn't recommend that, but you could do that. So you have to set up the entity, then your CPA or accountant or tax attorney would make a recommendation based upon your revenue status, which way you're going to ask the IRS to tax you. This has been in the news a lot lately, the last 3 years, as we had the Tax and Jobs Act come about in 2017. So this is a very important thing to do because it's not easy to move from one type of tax identity to another. Example, if you're an S corporation and then you want to change to a C corporation, it's not that easy to change. You have to justify it. If you're a C corporation and you want to take advantage of now being in a partnership situation, it's not that easy to change as far as being taxed, because the Treasury Department, the IRS, they want to see that you are following their guidelines. Give your business a name. Now here's something to consider: marketing research. So you have two different things here. You have your business name that you're going to use for marketing. many people talk about it, doing business as, or your DBA. But you also want your entity, your structure, your LLC to have a name so that you could use it in multiple things. So let's just say, I know we have Clayton High Schools here today. So let's say somebody went to Clayton and they're like, I'm going to register my business. So I'm going to go to the state of Missouri and I'm going to type in the state of Missouri's website to see if this registered corporation is there. And you're going to call it Clayton Enterprises. And they'll come up and say, no, nobody has ever registered this before. I like to keep registered names as kind of broad as possible. And here's why. Let's say you're going to start a photography. I think somebody said videography early in the session. You're going to start a photography or videography. And so you're going to call it John's Videography Services. Well, you don't want, that's your DBA. That's what you're going to do business as. But your corporation should be much more broad. Like I said, Clayton Enterprises or Clayton Consulting Services, doing business as John's Videography. Now, you may say, why is that? Because you can actually run many businesses under your master corporation. And some of them, though, you also want to be able to present to people and say, yes, I have Clayton Enterprises. I do a lot of different things. I have Clayton Consulting Services. I do a lot of different things. Oh, and what are those different things? Oh, well, I have a business that does videography. I have a business that does compliance. I have a business that does acquisitions. I have all these different businesses that go under one business name, one entity at the very beginning. You can register this in the state and also federally. It's not that difficult to do it. Some people like to have it done by an accountant or a bookkeeper or CPA just because they don't want to mess with it, but it's really not that difficult to do it. Each one of these corporations are registered by the state. Some states actually will provide you with more creditor protection, and that's for another, we can talk about all the pros and cons here. We got a lot of material today, but some states actually provide you more creditor protection if you actually register in their state. And it's legitimate to do that if you're trying to do things more than just in your state. So like example, Nevada and Wyoming and Delaware will offer you some more creditor protection than some other states, including Missouri, although Missouri's not bad. So then they're going to ask them to provide you with a state and federal tax ID number. And now it doesn't go on your personal taxes, it goes on your business taxes. And then after you figure out if you had any profit or loss, that number flows through to your personal tax return under most situations. Some of it, if you're a sole proprietor, can just all go underneath your regular tax return. Then if your entity, whether it's your state, your local municipality, we'll use Clayton again, or some of you guys are from, I think last year from U City or Brentwood or wherever you guys may from, your local municipalities will require permits and licenses. And in some cases, you would actually have to get federal licenses depending on your businesses. This next one is really important. Open up a separate bank account, okay? So you have a business account and you have your personal account. This is one of the biggest red flags for the IRS, because somebody will say, well, I took this business expense, but I paid for it in my personal account. So I had to go pick something up, and I put gas in my car, and I paid for it to go pick up this thing for the business. And so I'm going to write off this expense. And you paid for it with your debit to your, or you wrote a check. No, most people don't write checks for gas, but you pay for it with a debit card. And then if you ever get audited, you say, well, I'm taking it. How do I know you use this out of your personal account for business? So this is one of the biggest things that people do, I see on a weekly basis. They start a business and they have business only one account, one personal account, and they're taking business expenses out of it. It's a red flag for the IRS. And frankly, guys, it's going to cost you more time and energy trying to rectify your personal and business accounts every month. And what I found is people just give up and they stop doing it. So then you ask them, how profitable is your business? I don't know, because I think I might have been lending my business through my personal account more money, and you don't even know. So open up a separate business bank account. This one is register trademark, copyrights, or patent if you have something that is unique to the environment. I would like to say this isn't something that you have to do right away, because this is a pretty big expense, but I would do something pretty quickly after you know you're successful. One of the reasons I say you don't have to do it right away, I've talked to patent attorneys, copyright attorneys on this, and they say, if you can prove first use without even a trademark or a copyright or a patent, if you can prove first use, you have some protection. Not the amount of protection you want, but some protection. So I would try to get your business up and running if you have something specific that you want to protect, and then go get those copyrights and patents. And finally, I think I've already mentioned tax attorney. You need to get a legal advice every time. Whenever you have partnerships, you have to spell out the partnership agreement, the operating agreement, everything. Don't rely on, oh, it's my buddy. I am just going to, we've always been friends. I'm telling you, you're not always friends when there's stress in a business and things can go poorly. You can save your friendship if you just go back to the operating agreement or the partnership agreement. It says, you said you were going to work 30 hours promoting our business, and you didn't even work 30 hours last month, 30 hours a week. You didn't even work 30 hours last month. So you have something to point to actually legally then, unfortunately, it's helpful then to break up a partnership. Partnerships are very difficult, guys and gals. I mean, they're very, very difficult. So you have things in writing whenever you can. And a lot of you guys I know are probably, yeah, Justin.
Before you move on, can you scroll back down for a sec? Because I want to spend just a second giving them, like, taking a pause, because this is such amazing information, and these are some of the questions that we all get right off the bat at the beginning of the school year is, how do I make my business official? And you just have this lined out in such a great way. And I just want to make sure everyone has a chance to ask any specific questions about some of these complex.
I will send this to you, Justin, to send out too when we're finished.
Excellent. I mean, but some of these topics are really, they're not necessarily super complex, but you can get some legitimate advice right now from Bruce. I mean, just bank account, copyright, trademark. I'm especially curious about. I'll start the questions off.
Sure.
If you wouldn't mind spending a second talking about, like, what are maybe some pros and cons of an LLC versus an S Corp versus a partnership? Like, what would you recommend people as far as when they're starting a business? What structure is best?
Great question. I'm going to start this out by saying I'm not a CPA or tax attorney. So first of all, the LLC does provide you like a limited liability corporation. That's what they say. It's limited of your liability. So it's going to provide you with some protection for the assets. So whatever you put into the limited liability, let's say you start off the capital insertion into it, $100,000. And then your business under that LLC goes bankrupt, you're limited to whatever you actually put in there as far as your liability. Now that doesn't mean you still don't owe creditors and things like that if you run up a bill somewhere that you don't still owe them. And in every state, every state's different on these liabilities, but that would be one thing to help protect your liability. S corporation, I would think most of the people in this class have an idea that they want to start out with Sorry, not with an LLC, but just be taxed as a sole proprietor. It's the simplest way. You know, here's the revenue I brought in, here's the business expenses, and it goes right onto your personal tax return. It's just a schedule that you have to fill out, or your tax person has to fill out. Once your revenue, and I know this is arbitrary, but I'm just going to use this as an example. Once your revenue gets to like $100,000 and your profits are to get to about $60,000, how many, I can't see but a few people, but how many people have ever worked a W-2 job before? So when you have a W-2 and you get your paycheck, whatever they're paying you per hour, they take out federal taxes, state taxes, and what they call FICA taxes, which are Social Security and Medicare taxes. When you're an S corporation, you actually become, and when you're, let me back up. When you're a sole proprietor, you are now both the employee and the employer. So you have to not only take Social Security taxes as the employer, but you also have to take it out as the employee. So now instead of taking 6.2% for Social Security and 1.45 out for Medicare, you have to do that times 2, where a W-2 employee only has to take it out of their paycheck once, and the employer takes it out and contributes on their side. But when you're a sole proprietor, you're actually required to be the employer and the employee, so it eats into your profits. If you then decide, okay, I'm going to become an S corporation, you actually ask the federal government, I would like to be taxed as a W-2 employee in my corporation. So I'm going to become an employee of my corporation. And now there's some restrictions here. The government says that's fine, but you have to take what's called a reasonable salary. Now, what is a reasonable salary? Well, that's up to interpretation. I've had a lot of arguments with CPAs when we set this up. They say, well, you got to take it up to the max limit for Social Security contributions. And I say to them, can you show me in the IRS tax law where it actually says that? And they say, well, it doesn't really say that. I said, well, then that's not the interpretation. And then the most common one you'll get is saying, well, if you have $60,000 of profit, you need to take at least 50% as a salary. And as your salary of your own corporation. And I say to them again, can you show me that in the IRS tax code that says that? And they all say to me, well, it doesn't say that in there. And I say, so really the interpretation is reasonable salary. So then I say to them, the employee of the corporation, I would think a reasonable salary would be, what if I don't want to work in the corporation anymore? What would it take to replace me to run the corporation? That would seem to be reasonable. So if you know the free market, if you're making $60,000 and I can pay somebody $10 an hour or $12 an hour, which is anywhere between $20,000 and $24,000, then I would say that would be the reasonable salary for a $60,000 profit margin. Now, here's how this doesn't work really well, Justin, and I love to have my little whiteboard and explain all this, but let's see if I can do this. So if you have $60,000 profit without being taxed as an S corp, you're going to have to pay the 6.2 twice for FICA, and you're going to have to pay the 1.45 for Medicare twice. If you're now an employee of the business, you can actually take a $20,000 salary that we just discussed, and now you only have to pay that once for you and twice for the corporation. So now you're only paying FICA tax on the $20,000 instead of the $60,000. Now, what happens to the taxing of that other $40,000? Now that only comes out as ordinary income. So all you pay is the federal and state rate on that. You don't pay FICA taxes on that. This is perfectly legal to do. It happens every day across our country. Now, what are you giving up for that? And I think a lot of you young people, you don't pay any attention to Social Security and Medicare right now because you can't get it until age 62 and 65. What you're giving up on that is future smaller payments if you set it up that way of Social Security. Instead of making, I'm just making this up, instead of making $2,500 a month in Social Security when you're retired, maybe you only make $2,300, so you're giving up $200. Now, people question me all the time and say, well, wait a minute, why would I give up $200 a month for the rest of my life just so I pay less taxes now? Well, let's think about that. It's 6.2 times 2, which is 12.4, plus the 1.45 times 2, which is 2.9. So we add up that together, that's 15.3%, times 40,000 that we did not have to do. That's $6,120. So we have $6,120 today now, more revenue that we can use to grow our business and personal wealth. So, and we're only giving up about $200 in the future. So if you don't understand anything about money, I think you understand inflation. Money in our pocket today is worth more than it's going to be worth in 30 years because prices always go up. When I was your guys' age in the 70s, I paid 15 cents for a bottle of Coke. I mean, we all know there's no such thing as a 15-cent bottle of Coke anymore. When I was growing up in the 70s and I put gas in the car, I can remember gas as low as 39 cents. We all know that it's a lot higher. There's a couple of reasons for that. But mostly it's because of inflation, increase in the money supply. We don't have time during this to talk about that. But those are Justin, I think, is a real quick example of why somebody would want to do it. Now, why wouldn't everybody want to do it? Well, there's additional cost involved with this because you have to do a corporate tax return. You have to have, if you want to do it right, you have to do additional payroll structures, so on and so forth. So then you got to see, am I saving enough money from the FICA tax discount to offset those additional costs? And anybody can sit down and do what's called a tax pro forma and give you that answer. That was a long answer to a short question, but I think it required that long of an answer.
No, it was good. And again, before we move on, we only have about 10 minutes left. Does anybody want to ask any more questions about any of these particular topics as far as getting your business going? Just this might be a good opportunity to have a couple of real quick things checked off your box in case you're not 100% sure how to kind of get the ball rolling, which we will all be doing in about a month.
One of the things I'd like to bring up too, Justin, while we're waiting for any questions is, once you set this up, a lot of people think, well, I don't have any profits, so I don't have to do a tax return. If you set up and obtain a state and federal ID number, even if you don't have any profits, you have to file a tax return every year. So if you don't, then you actually can be penalized. I see this all the time. People are like, well, I didn't make any money the first 3 or 4 years, so I didn't even do a tax return. And I'm like, wait a minute, you have a federal tax ID number and you didn't do this? So now they don't have to pay taxes because they didn't have any profits, but guess what they have to pay? They have to pay a penalty for failure to file the taxes. So it's kind of a double slap in the face. You didn't make any money and you have to pay a penalty for not filing your corporate tax return. So those things are really important to know if you're going to set up these legal entities. Okay, great. And if you guys have any questions, you can get them to Mr. Hildebrand, I'm actually going to you can email me at the end. I'm going to fly through a couple more of these because we only have about 10 more minutes and I have several pages yet, but some of these are actually I think you already know about these. We are moving more and more to a technological society. And just like you guys are working out of your house right now, but if you have a brick and mortar, picking the business location is very, very important. Once again, you have to do market research for this. How you finance your business. And some of you, you're going to go with as simple as I saved up the money to friends and family, or the next level is to get a grant or a loan. Very, very common now is crowdfunding. You can actually trade equity. Trading equity is one of my least favorite. And here's what we mean about trading equity is somebody would actually say, well, I'll give you 100. You see this on, if anybody watches Shark Tank all the time, you said, somebody will say, I'll give you $100,000, but it's not a loan. I actually want 10 or 20 or 30% of your business. And to give up, if you really have a good idea to give that up, you better really do the evaluation of that, because you may be giving up a lot of your business for not that much of infusion of capital. The other one, angel investor, venture capitalists are really when you're talking about having this big idea that's going to need a lot of capital. They're not going to do this for small businesses of less than 25 million even. They're going to look at things that are $50 million of capitalization or higher. I think this is very important. Develop and improve your product and services. The Japanese call this kaizening. If you look that up, this doesn't happen as much, but Mr. Hildebrand and I can remember when Japanese cars were outpacing the Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler here in the United States, and all these Japanese cars were flooding the market because they were a lot better. But the reason they were a lot better is the American car market had it cornered in the 50s, the 60s, and 70s. Actually, I'd say more 50s, 60s, early 70s. And they thought, oh, well, Americans are always going to buy this, you know. And the quality of the cars kept coming down, down, down. They didn't try to get better. They rested on their laurels. The Japanese have this term called kaizen, or always get better, always get better. So that's what you should, if you look up Dan Sullivan, he's going to be talking about that also. Always get better. And that's where you get these brainstorming sessions, you get in a mastermind, or you actually hire specialists that can actually help you get better along the way. I talked about this, but I don't think I can emphasize this enough. You need to, if you go into this, times are going to be tough at the time that you don't even expect it. And once again, I'm glad we're talking about this because COVID. You know, we were at the highest productivity of the United States in maybe ever, or at least in 50, 60 years. And then all of a sudden, you know, what happens is what I call fat cats. You know, all these business owners were making all this kind of profit, but instead of saving the profit, or at least a large portion, to either make more efficiencies within their business, or to pay down debt, what do they normally do? They spent the money even more. They just took more out of the business. And then when we came crashing down, now they weren't in a capital position and they had to look for handouts from different people, government, businesses, or banks, excuse me, banks loaning to businesses. The government tried to do some things, but even there, they only kept certain amount afloat, and now they're still bickering on in the Congress whether they're going to do some more to try to keep businesses afloat. But all that does is increase debt to the United States, and it's going to make it more difficult to be productive as a whole country down the line, in my opinion. So you have to have this winning business attitude to win at all costs, not at all costs as far as cheating or doing things illegal, but that you're going to put the time and effort and put the creativity in and say, I've had way too many business owners say, well, if I'm not successful in 3 years, then I'm just going to go back to my W-2 job. And I say, then you shouldn't start your job. You shouldn't start your business. Because if you're putting a time frame on that, you're not committed that this is something that's going to be successful. All right. Here's some resources. and this, I'm going to get this to you guys, that you can look up, and it might help you do some additional reading. Sharpening your management skills, I think, is one of the key things. And I've actually been impressed by people that you guys know of, like Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. I believe at the very beginning, when you look at early interviewing, they were more introverted. They were not able to speak their opinion as much, but they've actually ramped up now to where they feel like they can manage people and actually move forward in a variety of different ways with people. And this is a skill that you can get better at. Doesn't mean that if you can't hire somebody to do that. That's what a COO does, Chief Operating or a CEO does for people that just can't do this. Finally, I think one of the things that and I think you're doing this right now, at least Mr. Hildebrand's doing it. He has a network. He knows me. So he's trying to leverage who he knows to help people. So you can get some, you don't want to try to get everything for free, complimentary, but you do want to try to leverage the people. And what I've found over my career is business owners, they are more than willing to try to help other business owners because they love talking about their business. So ask other business owners, hey, how did you get started? What are some of the things I ask questions? Here's a few other things to think about. Be honest with your relationship with money. If you're really bad, careless with money, you don't know where your money's going, that's going to become a huge problem in a business. So get control of your personal cash flow awareness. I don't like to use the word budget because I think budget is a negative word. I like to use the phrase cash flow awareness. You need to be aware where you're spending money. If you're not aware of where your money's going, you're not going to have the amount of capital in your business so that you can pivot and put the capital at different places. I've already kind of talked about this, access your personality. If you can't be that business owner that can actually manage people, you better figure out how to hire somebody that can manage people. If you can't be that business owner that can be creative or be a salesperson, you better hire somebody that can be creative and be a salesperson. So assess what is your personality. One of the things that you might do, guys, is there's a personality test. Everybody uses DISC. You may have heard of DISC or Strength Finders. One of the personality tests that I like is Kolbe, KOLBE.com. It's not very expensive to assess your personality, but the reason I like this one is Kolbe has been tried and true, and it's actually your personality that you would be like if you had no restrictions on you. So if you have no stresses, so how you perform the best with no restrictions, no stresses. So it's your true personality. So you might want to do it's like $49.95 to do that, and it'll tell you whether you're a fact finder, whether you're a follow-through person, whether you're a quick start, or whether you're an implementer. And then what you try to do is, if you're really high in one, you need to go and do that. Like example, a lot of people are in business world are quick starts. They don't need all the information, they just go. Well, as I just said, that's not always a good thing. So then you need to partner with a fact finder, somebody that's going to help you find the facts before you go. If you have two people or partners that are both quick starts, they will go too fast and make mistakes. If you have two people that are fact finders, they'll never get going because they don't have enough facts. They'll just keep looking. I don't know, Justin, it's 2 o'clock. I don't know if we have to wrap up here or what.
I was going to say, if you wouldn't mind maybe giving us I know everyone's got to get out of here in a second. I want to take a real quick picture. But if there's any last thoughts you just wanted to leave with the group, and then we'll wrap up. And
I just have one last thought.
Okay.
As people are looking to start a business, it used to be in our society that a W-2 worker was a lot more stable than a business owner. I frankly think it has flipped now. And the big reason why it has flipped is because the stock market has become a focus since 1979 when the 401k came out. Before that, people didn't really look at the stock market as being a future way to build their nest egg and their retirement, because there were pensions throughout throughout all these corporations. They're gone now. Why? Because they're a drag on profitability. They're trying to get higher profits so that they can get the stock price high. That's another 20-minute conversation we can have. But I believe that a business owner is actually more stable because they're in control of their own destiny. And you could just see this during the COVID right now. Tens of millions of people were laid off by businesses. And yes, a lot of business owners were hurt during this time period too, but they were actually able to take control of their own destiny and do what they could to keep their business going. So that's kind of my closing thought on that. And then I'll send you, here's my information if anybody ever wants to touch base with me, and I'll send this to Mr. Hildebrand and he can get it to you guys.
Awesome. Well, listen, I can't thank you enough for you being here today. Obviously, a wealth of knowledge with a lot of things business. And, you know, in the future, I think a lot of these students are going to get to a point where maybe they perhaps have some follow-up questions about certain aspects of their business, especially maybe the startup process and who knows where else. So we really thank you for being here today, but also being available, you know, later on in the future. That's great.
You're welcome.
So before we say goodbye and thank you, if we can all get and give him a real quick wave, round of applause, wherever you want to do. And I took a picture then, so we'll see how that looks on Instagram. So Bruce, thanks again for joining us today. And then I know that Clayton and Brentwood are going to get out of here for the day, so we'll see you all later on Friday. And then Ladou's sticking around. So thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Ladou's lucky.